Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Fellowship in Essential Oils. This week we're exploring Tulsi, Liz.
Yes, Holy Basil for those who don't know what Tulsi is, or if you're a Hindu, you may know it as the name Tulasi. But all the same thing, and not the same thing as sweet basil. But I think it's worth saying we did do sweet basil last week. So if you're interested in learning about the two in tandem, because obviously they're the same family, it's worth we'll hook them together in the description so you can zip between the two.
Yeah, definitely. Now, one point you made quite strongly last week is that they shouldn't be confused with each other because they are very different from each other. So I guess we should talk a little bit. The plant itself, very, very sacred in India. I've seen many different pictures of they'll often grow the Tulsi in the front garden or sometimes just in a pot. And I've seen like a whole bricked out front house area, which is one little sad Tulsi clinging on to life in a pot. But it is said to, invite divine presence in to the house. So, yeah, what can you tell us about Tulsi?
Yeah,
Another one of your books has been done on Tulsi.
yes. So I think I was trying to remember just as I was waiting to come on air what year I wrote it. I think maybe 2016. I don't know if you know the magazine Aromatica by Gege Halodi. He had, right back then, it was only being published in Hungarian, and he would ask me to write an article and he would and translate it into Hungarian. And he said, will you write about basil? And I was like, can you think of anything more boring to ask me for? But okay. But every time I was like going to the books, I kept seeing people writing basil and holy basil together. And I thought, that surely can't be a thing. Although at that point, I hadn't used the oil. So I thought, you know what, this is an experiment. So I got the holy basil and straight away I was, this is extraordinary. And there was so much that I didn't know about it. And as you quite rightly say, they in India they plant the plant usually in like almost like a stepped pyramid of bricks, and this is a sacred bush. And the reason why they do that is two reasons really interrelated. The first is that it's used for offerings to the god Vishnu, who is the preserver god, and he preserves balance in the universe. And Vishnu's consort is called Lakshmi, and she is goddess of wealth, goddess of good fortune, goddess of balance, all great things really. And it is said that the Tulsi plant, the holy basil, is the embodiment of Lakshmi. So it took me a while to get my head around what that meant, because normally when we're talking about, for example, last week we talked about sweet basil and we talked about how it invokes or evokes a lower, a voodoo goddess. In other words, because they are charmed by the sweet basil, they will come to do things for you. However, this idea of the embodiment is kind of a bit like taking the Eucharist in the Catholic Church. So when if you are a Catholic, you believe that when you take communion and you say it's the body of Christ broken for you, the blood of Christ shed for you, when you drink that and when you eat that, you're taking a piece of the God on. So that is different to the Protestant idea that this is a representative of his sacrifice to the world. So there's a really big difference. So we call it theogony. So the idea that if you eat this substance, then you take on a part of this deity. And in Hinduism, it's believed that all women are the incarnation of Lakshmi. And so by them taking on Tulasi or eating Tulasi or Tulsi, then they become more like she is, more beautiful, more loving, more able to help balance the universe.
Wow. Yeah. So, in a way, would you say this could be a dangerous assumption to make? But when it comes to the spirituality of the two oils, would you would you put Tulsi above basil, or do you think they just work in different realms?
Yes, and it is a profoundly sacred oil. It's I'm going to say plant, profoundly sacred plant, one of their most sacred and holy plants, and
Often referred to as the queen of the herbs, I believe.
yes, because she is the queen consort.
Yeah.
Because remember, this isn't like a situation where the plant is representative of Lakshmi. She is Lakshmi. She is Lakshmi on this earth. So therefore, when we plant a holy basil plant in front of the house, then we are bringing protection to the house. We are bringing balance and good luck and order to the environment. And when we spoke about basil last week, and we talked about how there's kind of like that saucy, sassy, kind of passionate aspect to it. With holy basil in Ayurveda, she's considered to be sattvic, which is the most serene medicine. And it's a very holy medicine, and it brings us absolutely into a state of balance and tranquility. And you might think, oh, like vetiver is tranquil. However, vetiver is not sattvic, because one of the prerequisites of something being sattvic is that there cannot be a sexual element. And because vetiver is aphrodisiac, then it's not sattvic, it's just tranquilizing. But this is sattvic. In other words, it brings serenity and balance, and there is no sexual energy to it whatsoever. Whereas with basil, like sweet basil, we could say it's almost like tainted by the sexual nature, but of course, that's a pleasurable force in the universe. But this is like the most serene of all the medicines.
So as a plant, it's obviously got many, many values, and we get the essential oil when we steam distill the leaves. How do you tend to use the oil?
So to clarify, there's very little written about the essential oil. There's very little research into the essential oil. However, there is an extraordinary amount of research into the herb. And it's important to make that definition, because there's sort of two different constituents in holy basil that do the job. So the first is rosmarinic acid, which doesn't pass through distillation. It's a very big molecule, and it's important in rosemary, in melissa. Does lots of different things, amazing things, but it's not in the essential oil, so it's not exactly the same. However, the other one that gives the power to it is eugenol, and as we know, eugenol is a tremendous force of nature within essential oils, and it kind of gives you a bit of an indication of what it might smell like if you haven't smelt it. I have to say, it's not a smell that I like. It's very sharp, pungent. There's kind of a mintiness to it. But very strong scent of cloves, but it smells very clinical. It's not a pretty smell at all. So we've talked about eugenol lots of times through all the different videos that we've done. So if you want to look back at, for example, clove, we go deeply into eugenol, but antibacterial, antiviral, very strong antimicrobial, also importantly, specifically within holy basil, a very strong antioxidant. But there are sort of a different tangent to holy basil, that rather than looking at it from a constituent point of view, it's what's called adaptogen. So adaptogen is one of those terms I've written in a book. It made me laugh because I thought, well, I wrote that and I still think that's true. A term that gets thrown around more than rice at weddings. I like that, Liz. I like that. And it's still true, because people still write adaptogen about things that are not. But this is. So what is adaptogen? So it means something that can bring the body back into homeostasis. So by that we mean blood sugar, blood pressure, water volume. And adaptogens were first sort of spoke about in the 1960s on a broad level. But there was a whole body of work done from around about 1940 to about 1970 by two tremendous Russian scientists. So the first one was a guy called Nikolai Laslev, who was asked by the by the Russian government to create a way to make the army, the military in Siberia better at being able to endure the elements. So he began by creating like lots of psychedelic cocktails, and as you can imagine, you know, you're floating across the snow, that works, and that's really good. You can zoop, you know, loads of like amphetamines and stuff, you're zooping through, and yeah, it made a super force. However, the side effects as they came down and the recovery was very bad. So they knew that that could increase endurance, but they needed to look at something that didn't have so many side effects. And so they started looking into plants. And in around about 1945, he was joined by another scientist called Dr. Israel Breckman, who is a really well decorated scientist. So I wrote down in 1985, I was given the Lenin Medal of Valiant Work, which is like the highest civilian honour that you can have, and also the Certificate of Honour. And this was based on his work with these adaptogen medicinal plants. So he was so prolific. So he created 40 patents, 21 international patents. He wrote 2 monographs and hundreds of scientific papers, mostly focused on one particular plant called Eleuthero, but also on Holy Basil. So a lot of the information that we have comes from these monographs, and he talks about how tremendous it is for looking after the body after trauma. And by that we mean it could be like Siberian desert trauma, but it could also be surgical trauma, emotional trauma, and also what was I going to say? Pharmaceutical trauma. And by that I mean a lot of the more recent studies are done into rats and rabbits that have been given awful things to make the bodies bad, and usually with diabetes. So this is a really important thing, that it is tremendous for diabetes. It can do so many different things. There was one, so obviously it like normalizes blood sugar and all of that stuff that you would expect, but diabetes has really peripheral effects, like damage to the feet, like cuts and bruises cuts won't heal themselves. There's a kind of like sight problem called retinopathy. So they even were able to prove that in rabbits, they pharmaceutical trauma to their eyes to make them go blind from retinopathy. The Holy Basil reversed that and brought their sight back. So there was inordinate amounts of research into diabetes, but then we go further out to that. Obviously, diabetes and digestion then relates to cholesterol. And again, all of this problem. So remember, adaptogen means regulates blood sugar, but also settles cholesterol. Loads of digestion stuff, anything to do with stress when the body has gone through an arduous moment, all of that brings this situation back into balance. And from my own experience, I used it accidentally. It had arrived 2 days before a really big trauma, and I used it, and it was a kind of trauma that I thought, this is awful, this is going to leave real significant damage. And whilst I can remember it and think back to it, it doesn't feel like the trauma remained. And it's fascinating from that point of view. So I would say any kind of physiological imbalance in the body, you can use Holy Basil for. However, it is a really strong oil, and we have to think about dilutions. And we'll talk about that in a minute, because I'm Sick of the sound of my old voice. What have you got to say about it?
Yeah, for me, it's been, this is why I was really interested because when you said that, Basil and Tulsi are very, very different from each other, I've lent into them both to help myself on my own journey with like exhaustion. And I found that they both work really, really well. Interesting what you said about you don't know the smell of it. It did take me a little while to get used to it, but I can actually smell notes of chocolate in mine. So which is kind of interesting. So it's actually the aroma has grown on me in that way. But where I find it really useful is I do like to, put it either on the soles of the feet or on the adrenals. And that's where I'm like, if you're feeling exhausted, if you're totally out of balance, if you're totally out of whack, and kind of echoing what you were just finishing up with there, then Tulsi is one that you need to kind of lean into that evening.
Yes, and jet lag.
Yeah, of course, definitely. Yes.
Yeah, so when I go to other countries to lecture, many people will know that I absolutely hate doing it. My anxiety is really bad, but I do find that Holy Basil is really helpful for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So would you, when you're talking about, being the adaptogenic and using it to help us get back, balance out blood sugar, balance out all those different things, how are you recommending using it? Topically in certain areas or aromatically?
I would always use it topically, yeah. I say that. I do use it on an aroma pendant when I go travelling, I suppose, but most of the time it's topically. An area that I forgot to talk about was teeth. It's really well researched for teeth. So all sorts of like periodontis bacteria, staphylococcus and streptococcus infections. But also, if somebody has an injury to their jaw, then there's a lot of research into how having the tincture can help it to heal much quicker. Helps the bone knit back together, so not necessarily strength. They were able to prove another plant, can't remember. It wasn't one you were using in aromatherapy. I remember thinking it was like a kind of grape, but that helped the jaw get stronger. Tulsi didn't help with that, but it did help to knit the bone faster.
Would that only be in an oral context, or if I broke my femur?
Don't know the answer. I think the answer to that is we can only speak to the experiments we're seeing. But I would have thought that bone grows and knits together. So if it does in the jaw, then presumably it does in other parts of the body. But I haven't seen some scientific evidence to support that. But bear in mind homeostasis. Homeostasis is as much about physical balance, being able for locomotion as well. So presumably it would need to be that to be able to say that it was adaptogen, I would have thought.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Yeah. I'm going to take us off on a tangent now about where I really do like Tulsi from more of a spiritual perspective. And this comes with a language warning, but I am Australian, so I'm bound to swear. And I actually love Tulsi for dickheads. And I don't know if you've noticed, Liz, but how many dickheads there are around?
There's a lot.
We're getting around for Christmas, and there's dickheads on the road, and there's dickheads on the TV, and there's dickheads at work, and all that.
I'm not sure you're allowed to use that for a Sapphic word.
It doesn't really tune in with this kind of regal nature of which you were depicting her before. So I could end myself in hot water. But I find, what we can do is we spend so much time getting distracted by what the dickheads do. Like, why can't that person learn to drive? What on earth is that prime minister doing? What, and that kind of thing. And what is my sister doing? And what is my brother-in-law doing? And what is the kids doing? And we can get so worried about what everyone else is doing. And it's almost like we forget that we're driving our own car when we run off the lane. And I find that Tulsi works really, really beautifully for people that are overly concerned with what everyone else is doing and forget to drive their own life. It's a really nice, I attribute it to the crown chakra. I think it is a very holy and very regal oil. But, there's so many things in life where we tend to, sometimes other people try and distract us, but I find Tulsi is really good for those that are easily distracted by what everyone else is doing and concerned with what everyone else is doing rather than listening to themselves. Just like we were talking about, I find it helpful for exhaustion. Again, that exhaustion is often a concern about what's happening and the obligations that are around you, rather than the obligations of or the self-imposed desires or being in tune with those desires. And I think Tulsi is a really nice one to come back to who you are, what matters, worrying about yourself and not worrying about dickheads. So that's why I really love Tulsi.
Okay. I don't think there's an oil log big enough to stop me thinking, commenting on dickheads. I can see how that would work, actually. However, I don't think I can use that word with her. She is that big.
Okay. How would you, from, you talked a little bit about Lakshmi at the start, from a spiritual perspective and from when you're writing the book, where would you lean into her for emotional or spiritual aspects?
Well, it sounds banal to say balance, but balance.
Yeah.
But yeah, trauma, really. I mean, I have to say, she's not one that I grab automatically because I don't like the smell. So it is like a conscious decision. You need to use Tulsi because it wouldn't be one that I go, I feel like I want to just lounge in vetiver or whatever, you know what I mean? But I think also when you have times where you think, well, so recently I said, I went through a week the other day and I said, I think I must have stepped on a robin. Everything just went wrong. I mean, it was seriously bad shit as well. And I think there's an element of being, although we need to change the balance, we need to bring the good fortune, that's from like a magical point of view, you could use it that way. But usually I would be using it physically and emotionally more than spiritually, yeah.
Yeah, I did see a really great passage recently on social media, and it was about this lady was talking about the power of your peace, and that the most powerful people in the world are those that are able to preserve their peace regardless of what's happening around them, and how easily we will allow something to disturb us and disturb our peace. And when you're talking about this nature of Tulsi, it really reminded me of that it could be a really good preserver of our own harmony and peace in that way. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe not just reaching for it reactively when things are going wrong, but maybe leaning into her when, we're about to go into the holiday season, when things go a little bit batshit crazy and all the dickheads come out. So it could be a really nice one just to kind of protectively go, okay, this is going to be a crazy time, but I'm opting to maintain and not give away my peace to someone else or anything else. And Tulsi will be my aromatic amulet to help me with that.
Yeah, and if you look at it from an Ayurvedic point of view, they work on 3 doshas, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. It is invigorating to Kapha. So Kapha dosha is all about, or if you envisage it from a visual point of view, it's earth and water combined. So that's mud. So Kapha dosha is heavy and it's sluggish. So we can think about, okay, that's interesting that it's related to diabetes, because that's related to obesity. But also to do with sluggish digestion and the body not being able to sort of process things like that. So we might also think about how when we eat too much after Christmas, after the holidays, we feel and we feel we've got indigestion and we don't want to move and you just like procrastinating. All of those are indications of Holy Basil.
Yeah, interesting. Now, another thing that I have seen Holy Basil being used for is to prevent thieves. So I have a little duo blend. Tangerines are also another, or tangerine oil is another thing that, particularly in parts of China, where they'll place tangerines around the home to protect it when you go traveling. So with it being the holiday season, And we're worried. Oh, I'm leaving the house for a couple of weeks. I hope no one breaks in. A combination in the diffuser just before you go of Tulsi and tangerine is my little duet for protecting the home from thieves and any kind of harm. And I think also, like I do often use tangerine for also protecting the adventurer for going out in the world. Maybe you found Tulsi helps you when you travel. Tulsi and tangerine could be the traveler's toolkit.
There's quite a lot of origin stories of Tulsi, because it's, well, in India they say it is the plant with the most medicinal properties. They don't say rose, they don't say lavender. Tulsi has that honour, and you can see mentions of it right back to the Revered, which is around about 1500 BCE. So it's been written about for a long, long time. And there's lots of origin stories, but there's a beautiful one about a young girl called, I remember her name, but I don't remember her husband's name. But anyway, her name was Vrinda, and her husband's name has gone. But anyway, he was going off to war, off to battle. And he said to her, Vrinda, while I'm away, you must pray for me. And she loved him so much. Of course, she wanted to pray for him. And so she prayed to all of the gods, but particularly to Vishnu, to preserve him, because, of course, he's the god of preservation. So she's praying and praying and praying every day. And because of this incredible love and prayer that's coming out, the husband becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. But unfortunately for both of them, really, so does his ego, because he's getting so strong. He's like, I could take over this area. I could champion this place. I could conquer. And he conquers all of these places. And then he goes, so I want the heavens too. So then he goes after other gods. Names have gone. Brahman.
Shiva.
Thank you, exactly right. Brahma, Shiva. And they're like, what are we going to do? And they realise that the only way that they can conquer him is to stop Vrinda from praying. Well, she's not going to do that because she absolutely adores him. So Vishnu says, right, I've got an idea. And he manifests in front of her in her husband's body. And he says, I have done. I am complete. I have finished. Everything is done. And she goes, oh, thank goodness. And she stops praying. And at that moment, they slaughter the husband. And she feels him going. And she feels like he's lost from the world, and looks straight at Vishnu and says, who are you? And he says, and he explains, and he says, his power was your love. However, you failed in your duties. And she says, how could I have failed in my duties? And he said, well, you should have noticed that he was going out of control. And because of that, this is on you. You're supposed to have maintained this balance. And she's so upset, she dies. And they say, well, don't worry, don't be too sad, because she will be reincarnated in the spirit of the Tulsi plant. And so when you're talking about the strength of peace, the strength of prayer is also related to Tulsi.
So it could be a really good one in the evening, just to kind of recalibrate in the evening and refocus on what's important, I guess, overall.
And also that, like, Catholics have rosary beads, you know what I'm talking about, the prayer beads that count. So Hindu prayer beads are made out of Tulsi. And they represent like the body, but also counting and the devotion to prayer.
Yeah, amazing. Now, astrologically, which planet would you attribute Tulsi to? Jupiter. I would agree with that. Yep. Yeah. Very much so.
With all this sort of cholesterol and diabetes and issues with kids and the authority, particularly the Prime Minister, those feelings of anger and exhaustion, all related to the liver and to Jupiter.
Very much so. And I find with such a spiritual nature about it, it can, once we stop worrying about dickheads, it will actually, Tulsi is a good one for helping us progress on our path because we're giving more energy to our own pathway rather than someone else's pathway as well. So, and with tangerine, I also, although most citruses are attributed to the sun, I find that tangerine has got a bit of a Jupiter essence in it, in that expansive and that curiosity. So they're a nice little pairing together. But yeah, they're kind of like the travelers duo. I'm kind of just create that today. And chakra wise?
So first, I just want to say how lovely I think that would smell, tangerine and holy basil. It's a hard oil to blend with. I like that idea. I think it's all chakras, and actually, Vasant Lad writes that it's all chakras as well. I just think that the whole balancing.
The alignment. Interesting. Yep. If you had to pick one, if I made you pick one,
I'd say balance on all chakras. Crown chakra.
Pardon?
Crown or solar plexus, but I do think all of them.
Okay. Yeah, I stick to the crown because I am a purist like that. So again, for the reasons we've discussed as well. Any other things that you want to tell people about the book, or should they just buy the book?
So no, I do want to. There is a lot more in the book about the heart, about lots of different things. One thing that we should state here is maximum dilution of holy basil essential oil is just 1%. It's much lower than most oils. It's so strong, and you know how I said I wear it on an aroma pendant. A personal warning for me: when you put your oil in and you put your aroma pendant over your head, don't get it in your eyes. Oh my god, it hurts so much. So
yeah,
don't do that. Yeah, 1% maximum dilution, and don't use it in pregnancy.
Yeah, no, I think I've had pretty much every oil in my eyes at some point in time.
That was the worst ever. I just didn't know what to do with myself.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that is Tulsi, another amazing essential oil, and we'll be back next week when we dive into another oil. But remember, if you've got questions about Tulsi now, and you're like, oh, I want to ask, then you're welcome to put comments under the video or the podcast wherever you're listening. But the best thing to do is book your ticket to the masterclass. And that's where we actually have a massive Q&A time. Sometimes we'll go for up to an hour just answering people's questions, and they're really good questions because it seems that we have good viewers and listeners. So come along and ask your Tulsi questions. The link and the discount code are below whatever platform you're listening on. You can click there, and we're doing that in February. And even if you can't make it live, you can get the replay and let's do it over and over again as well. So.
And just a quick note about holy basil. You might think it's one that you won't use very much. I can tell you that it is the best selling of all my books because there's hardly anything written about it. I sell more of that book than any others. So if you want to find it, it is on Amazon.
And I think it's definitely an oil to have, with the fact that there is so many, that we're often spending our lives or having periods of life out of balance, or a lot of things that take us out of balance. And there's going to be, I don't think we can find a cure for dickheads. So there's plenty of dickheads. So I think everyone needs Tulsi in their collection and your book as well.
Thank you.
We will see you next week for Fellowship in Essential Oils. Until then, take care and get your Tulsi out.
Bye-bye.